A while ago I decided to renovate the entire house, a complete tear out and rebuild. But when it came to the computer room, the renovator guy was a little bit out of his depth. So I said, yeah, fair enough, I'll do it myself. You can see here the typical thing that happens where technology moves on, and wires end up everywhere. So even though I had quite a nice computer support stand, I thought, no, I'll make the whole thing very integrated. So I sat down with SolidWorks and incorporated everything in a wish list of what I wanted and how I wanted to manage everything and what sort of layout I wanted. It actually involved lots and lots of measurements, because the measurements at the floor are not the same as the measurements at the deck level. The house is not built particularly straight, and the way I wanted to integrate everything, I had to take account of the irregularities and so on and so forth. Using the output from SolidWorks as a cut list, I built all of the structural components with particle board with melamine coating, what they call whiteboard here in Australia. So the support structure runs around 3 walls of the computer room, but the windows are at different angles and different widths. So getting the exact proportions for a suitable benchtop size and suitable area for the chair to move around, and placement of computers and placement of the central star point for all of my electronics, including Cat6, Ethernet and so on through the house, are all integrated here. So here is the starting point with the newly polished floor. So here we start in the rear corner, a filing cabinet for the odd bits of receipts and things I might need these days. Takes standard filing cabinet sheaves, a little shorter or less deep than might be normal, but I'm slowly going all electronic. There are provisions left to fit dress panels later. So here we see the beginnings of the support structure. You'll note that the front portion is a box section which is rigid both torsionally and in bending. At the rear you can see there's a trough for cabling, so it can all be hidden. The back sections of the structure are anchor bolted into the walls in such a manner that you can walk on the structure without risk. Here we duck down to the communication centre, where you can see 2 black vertical cable trays. On the left there are 6 star points for the house's intranet, which go to the shed, the bedrooms and the lounge room. On the right you see 16 general purpose outlets for all those endless different power supplies that everything seems to need. Above, half submerged, is a 140mm silent computer fan that blows air out of the computer room into the brick wall cavity, which then goes around the entire house and vents at the other end of the house. And in the centre is a Wi-Fi router, which also patches into those intranet points to the left. And now we get to the really tricky bench. It has to meet a lot of criterion. The 2 ends have to be a sensible width to be useful, and the recess where the keyboard is has to be in a place where you can sit without your feet hitting the window. You can see the 2 stainless steel supports for the weakness where the keyboard is going to go. And inside there are wooden elements that distribute the force into the square box section. In addition, the window side of the bench needs to be supported, and that's done by round bars which go through the box section, across the cable tray, through the fascia board, and go into boreholes, first one into the aluminium window frame you see there, and in later views you'll see that there's a dummy piece of window joinery being put under the bench up to where those bars can anchor into it. And now we come to the really magic bit. The bench top's made in solid jarrah, 30mm thick, 40mm wide jarrah strakes. The guy that made it is a really magic woodworker. He owns his company and he wouldn't let the guys work on it. He came in on the weekends to make sure it was all right and did it all himself. So I gave him the dimensions exact as I saw it in SolidWorks. And he made a dummy in plywood, very light plywood, with a few millimetres short all the way around the perimeter of the wall. It was made in several pieces, and he brought it around and we clamped it in a position so that the front edge of the bench all the way around lined up exactly how it should. And then we put plywood trim strips around the perimeter and used 10mm wide or thick gauge blocks between the worst of the concrete blocks and the trim plywood, and then nailed the trim pieces to the main plywood dummy. So when the real item arrived, it was perfect. He was uncertain as to why I wanted to have 10mm gaps between all the articulating parts of this bench top. And the reason is that if you need to adjust for minor shrinkages and expansions and so on, it's better to have quite a big shadow relief there. And in fact, when we finally put them in, they varied between 10mm and sometimes 8. Some of them were spot on to 10. And I think they probably have a bit of variation from summer and winter as the moisture changes. The other thing to note is the continuity of each strake all the way around. Each piece of wood across each joint matches up perfectly. There are two exceptions. The miters on the corner, if you're matching like that, mean you lose a chunk of wood. You can't just flip the joint over. So in that case, he messed around to find a very good colour match to keep the continuity. One thing I did have to explain to him is the particular miter joint between the front bench and the next one has to have a special calculation for the angle to keep the width of the straights matching up. It took a bit of time to figure that out as how you do it on the plywood dummy, but in the end we ended up putting some trim strips there with exactly the right protractor angle to make it correct. So when it arrived, it was all put in place and there was no extra hand finishing done at all. Just, as I noted, the minor trims on the 10mm pieces that go in the relief gaps. And now we get to the finished item. I did the spray painting of the lacquer on it, 3 coats of the finest mist I could get out of my gun, so as it shows the grain still. Done on trestles outside on the lawn on a calm, warm day. But inevitably you get a small amount of dust. And here's the trick. Once it's hardened up, you sand it with a little bit of brown glossy paper. And it just takes little nibs off and leaves the satin finish unscathed. So you can only really tell when you rub it with your hand after you do it. It feels smooth, but it doesn't affect the finish. The galoots tell me it's about equivalent to sanding lightly with 1600 grit. So now we just have a cascade of shots of it. You can see it's got the flow painted fascia panels on and fully functional, how the doors can come off the communication centre, and the neighbour's cat being the inspector of works and telling me I've done it all wrong. Clearly it's not cosy enough for a cat to sleep in. You'll also note that I've fitted the hinges to the front of the articulating panels, which allows you to lift the bench top and put any new cabling in you want. And when they're down, you'll notice there are almost no visible cable tangles. You'll notice the entire tabletop tilts. I couldn't come up with a way of sliding it back to get to the cable tray, or just tilting apart by the cable tray that didn't look ugly. The downside is that the big part of the desk is a bit awkward to access and a bit difficult to lift. And so you can get your hands under it. You might have noticed there's a red lever underneath, which is a toggle with a plunger that lifts the rear edge of the whole bench up about 50 millimetres, so you can get a good grip on it and raise it completely. This is from about 10 years ago, and so things have changed a little, but the landline you see there works with the new NBN system, which is not just a router but has also a fallback to 4G phone, which doesn't work because my house is a Faraday cage, and neither do any of my 5G phones, so I'm stuck with a landline. And the last photo is taken very recently, and if you look closely you can see all the concrete blocks have now been tiled with acoustic tiles, so I can record videos. So thanks for watching. That's about it. I hope it's given you some ideas to make a better computer hobby room for you.